Hey everyone, welcome back to the Layback Podcast. Joining us today is Jess Geiger. Jess is a graduate of Wake Forest, graduate of Virginia Tech, doing some really cool things in the biomedical space these days. Just picked up a job with New Balance. I'm not going to butcher this any more than I probably already have. So you guys know the drill. Just at this point, I'm going to hand it off to Jessica. Jessica, thanks a ton for coming on today, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion we have going forward with the study, the human side of it, and really just the work that you have done over the past calendar year.
Of course. Thanks for having me on, Adam. Like you said, I graduated from Virginia Tech in 2023 with my bachelor's in mechanical engineering. And then I went on to get my master's degree in biomedical engineering, where I did all of my research in the Wake Forest Biomechanics and Pitching Lab. It was an awesome experience. And I just graduated this last spring. And while I was there, I also was a data processing engineer for Kinetrax, which was really great to have both the Kinetrax experience and my graduate experience. And then now, like you said as well, I'll be going off to New Balance as a sports research engineering intern, which I'm super duper excited about. And I'm in Boston now and can't wait to get started with that.
Awesome stuff. Yeah, I definitely didn't mention the Kinetrax, which is cool to your background. I know you are a Mitten native. You're from Michigan as well. And if I'm not mistaken, your athletics background was lacrosse and field hockey, correct?
Yep. I did both of those. I played lacrosse very briefly at Virginia Tech and stopped because of engineering and COVID. And there was a bunch of different factors. But yes, I was a lacrosse player growing up.
So then ultimately, what was the draw to baseball from the sports that you had grown up playing?
I kind of ended up at the Wake Forest Pitching Lab on accident. I originally wanted to go into my program, which is a dual program between Wake Forest and Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech really had a strong engineering program, and Wake Forest had a very strong hospital background. And so the two universities joined together to make their SBS program, which stands for the School of Biomedical Engineering and Sciences. And so because I was at Virginia Tech, I kind of just wanted to sail right into my graduate degree there and continue in Blacksburg. But I got invited to come check out Wake Forest when I was doing all of my grad school recruitment. And when I was there, I interviewed with Dr. Nicholson, the head of the pitching lab, and I absolutely fell in love with it. I mean, it's obviously such an amazing facility. It's super duper cool to do research there. And Dr. Nicholson is also super smart. She's very humble and she's done a ton of amazing research. So it was almost, how could I not take that opportunity? And our running joke was always that we didn't really know much about baseball, but we had a lot of biomechanics background in research. And so we were the two women of the pitching lab, and we really ran up all of that biomechanics. And I'm really glad I went forward with that research and with that experience, because it truly was a once in a lifetime experience. And I'm so glad I got to be there.
Certainly bolsters the resume. I think the baseball world is always looking for something new. Obviously, from what we
Yes.
try to do, there's no question the research drives what we do and what the industry does as a whole. So what was the first research project, big or small, that you took on either at the lab or on your own?
Well, starting in the lab, it at first was just getting comfortable with our day-to-day functions, whether that was a pitching evaluation or how we were interacting with the team. And Dr. Nicholson was a really great advisor in saying, I understand you're a graduate student and you really have to get those classes and credits done. And so our first year was pretty much focused on getting those classes done, but we were still within the lab functioning with the day-to-day operations, like I said, the evaluations with the team, data cleaning, processing, all of that good stuff. But when it came to my research, I approached Dr. Nicholson by saying I wasn't 100% sure exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to have a project that really focused on injury rehabilitation and prevention. And that's when FlexPro Grip came into play. And she told me the team is using the device, and this device is supposed to help players prevent UCL injuries or rehab those injuries. And so I went forward with that study because I said, very conveniently the team was using it and they had used it for the past year or so. And it's nice to have it right there in front of you at your fingertips. I mean, in science, a lot of the problems are participant recruitment, and I had a whole pitching roster at my fingertips. So I went forward with that, and the idea of the research was very interesting to me. But I also did a study where I looked at statistical parametric mapping of biomechanics that could perhaps help coaches indicate where a player might be at risk for UCL injury. And so it was not necessarily a predictive model, but it was to compare those biomechanics and understand if there are certain factors that do differ between those players that went on to rupture their UCL versus those who did not. So a lot of the ideas were produced by Dr. Nicholson, and she helped me with those ideas, but we did talk together and to develop where I would go and what direction for my research.
When did you take on that biomechanical mapping project? Was that before the grip strengthening study, or were you doing those kind of simultaneously?
I started it prior to the FlexPro Grip study because it was a retrospective study, which means I didn't collect any data. I used pre-existing data that we had within the lab. So I could kind of do it whenever, it wasn't necessarily a timeline or I had to get a bunch of participants rallied up. It was just data that I had and writing my code and understanding the results and interpreting those. But a lot of my research was done side by side. So I was getting all of my participants together for this study, but then also working with my whole other study that was going on and trying to understand it and clean up the data and cut it and make sure it made sense. And so there was a lot going on at once. So that was happening in my other study, and then also everything that goes on in the lab from a regular day-to-day basis.
Right, because as a lab worker, I don't know what the proper team member,
Yeah.
I don't know what the proper phrasing there would be as a
They
member
call
of
you
the
like
lab.
a graduate lab assistant or just like a graduate laboratory technician type of a position.
Okay. So, as one of the individuals assisting in the lab, with all the fancy titles and names associated with it, your goal is also to help the team win as support staff, correct? Or present data that can eventually be used for the team. And I know there's a difference between the analytics team and the actual crew in the lab. So I'm assuming, though, there's a lot of crossover or support one to the other, or am I just completely out of pocket and trying to make that connection?
Yes and no. So we do some preliminary evaluations on all the pitchers. So like when all of the either transfers or freshmen come in, we like to have all the players come in and we'll run a pitching evaluation essentially on them without doing all of our range of motion and just like other testing we will do. But we'll do a full biomechanical analysis of their throw and then meet with the pitching coaches and staff just to help them understand how their players are moving, what they might want to be looking at in improving their pitch, how they could potentially increase their speed or decrease that elbow varus torque, stuff like that. But on a regular day-to-day basis, the analytics team does work a lot more closely with the team. We focus more on those pitching evaluations that come in, people that aren't on the Wake Forest team, but then also other studies we may have going on within the lab. So we did like a dance study. We had the quarterback from the football team came in and we did a throwing evaluation on him, or there's a whole bunch of different research that goes on within our lab. It's not just tailored to the wake pitchers, which is cool, but it's nice that they also have access to us if they need
Yeah,
us.
totally. Okay, well, I appreciate that clarification because that was not something I fully understood. I want to back things up for a bit now. You mentioned you were a mechanical engineering student at Virginia Tech. How did mechanical engineering get parlayed into biomedical?
That's a good question. So when I was a freshman, I was going back and forth on whether or not I wanted to do biomedical or mechanical. And everyone always told me, they were like, just go with mechanical. Everyone loves a mechanical engineer. You're the most versatile engineer. You can go into the aerospace field. You can go into the chemical field. You can go into the electrical engineering field. You can go pretty much wherever because you're a jack of all trades and they teach you everything. So you're an extremely dynamic engineer and you learn a lot. But I always wanted to go into more of a human side of engineering. And while I don't think we necessarily look at the human body as an engineering problem, it really is when you look at injury and recovery, because every component of your body is a different segment and a moment arm and everything's moving together, and it's really all just a big physics problem and how we can eliminate those injuries and parts of your body breaking. And so I knew that I wanted to go into biomechanics because while I was at Virginia Tech, I volunteered in a motion capture lab there called the Granada Lab. And they do primarily gait and running. And they'll look at, how people are moving and walking, whether that's before and after surgery or just under different conditions, ACL tears, all that good stuff. And I absolutely loved it. I fell in love with it so much. I thought it was the coolest thing ever, applying engineering to the human body. It was just so cool. So that was my first experience to biomechanics. And I wanted to do that. And the pitching lab was like the perfect combination between what I wanted to do, but also my love of sports. Granted, I didn't know a whole lot about baseball, but I know a lot more now. It's a very cool experience taking a very, I don't know how to explain. Mechanical engineering is just like a very complicated degree that's usually thought out as like applied to cars or air conditioners, HVAC systems, but taking that and putting it towards baseball and explaining how your body is really just a big machine working together. So it's a really cool field and I absolutely love it so much. I love what I do every day. So
Appreciate you connecting those dots,
yes.
and I'm glad you mentioned the human element and that being such a driver of what you do.
Yes.
Knowing kind of our mission for this episode is to share the human side of the amazing work you did. We are very appreciative that we were able to be, I guess, a third party in a sense. I don't know the fancy terms of research or when these things actually get published, but we were honored that you wanted to study the actual efficacy of FlexPro Grip. And that might even be a good place to start because off camera, or I guess off recording, we've talked briefly about what your initial hypotheses were going into this study. And not the hypotheses of what a grip strengthening program could do, but actually you just as a person looking at what we claim FlexPro Grip can do, and then you saying, yeah, I don't know if it's going to do what they say. And
Yeah, I was
don't
not
worry,
convinced
Jess,
at first.
because don't worry, because I spent the first year of our development of FlexPro Grip as a company trying to prove it wouldn't work. Like that was my goal, was to like I don't like nobody else could do this. Like nobody else has reduced the risk of elbow injuries. How can a father and son team be the ones that actually figure this out? So
Right.
I doubted it myself. But with all that, I'm just going to pass it over to you to take this torch and I'll interject along the way. But the initial takeaway or the initial take from you, I suppose, was you had your doubts, correct?
Yeah, I was not fully convinced at first. We, see the device and then I think to myself, like, how could this possibly work? It doesn't seem like it would to me. And done a lot of like forearm strengthening workouts where you take the rod and you roll it up and you have the weight on it. And I'm like, how is this any like more special than that? And how is this specifically targeting all of these special muscles that are, I don't know. I was not convinced at all. I really was working to see if it did work. And like we saw, it did. It really did work a lot. And I was shocked. I remember sitting in my lab meeting when I was going through my results and I was like, yeah, it worked. it decreased that elbow gapping and really stabilized the medial elbow. So I was really happily surprised, I guess. And I mean, obviously that's great for you all as well to have a device that's working and people are using it and hopefully decreasing those injuries or strengthening their forearms to rehab their elbow back from an elbow injury. But yeah, I was not convinced at first, and I was proven wrong.
It definitely feels good to know that we aren't snake oil salesmen, that we're actually doing what we claim to do, coming from third-party research as well. But maybe the cute little question here is how many times did you run your data to actually convince yourself that it was real and it worked?
I was measuring ultrasound images for weeks and weeks and weeks. I was going insane looking at black and white images of elbows and forearm muscles. It was horrible. I did not have a lot of fun doing that. And I would go back and double check to make sure, like, wait, was that really, did their gapping really decrease that much? Like, let me double check that again. Let me go see. And, I remeasure and lo and behold, like, yes, it was that way. And I did a lot of double checking because I wasn't convinced. I really just thought there's no way, it's my fault. Again, I just remeasured over and over, and it really was the truth. Looking at those numbers and running different statistical analyses of, you're testing different things and comparing different types of numbers and data and all that type of stuff. So I did a lot of running of numbers, but also a lot of measuring. It was just so much measuring and reading as well. And yes, a lot of work.
We are very much appreciative that you did that work, and maybe bad podcasting, but I realize most people are pretty consistent listeners, but we might have buried the lead a little bit here. So if I can ask, maybe if you can give the elevator pitch style summary of the study as a whole.
Definitely. So the purpose of the study was to look at whether or not this forearm strengthening device, aka the FlexPro Grip, would help stabilize and decrease the medial elbow joint gapping. So the space between the two bones in the elbow, whether or not that will decrease or not through strengthening those extrinsic forearm muscles that do protect the UCL. And so I had two groups, a control group that did not use the FlexPro Grip, and then I had the group that did use the FlexPro Grip. And it was over 10 weeks, and I measured all of their variables before and after that 10 weeks to see where their changes may have occurred. And granted, I didn't have a whole lot of control over the control group. It was just kind of sending them off into the wild and saying, don't use the FlexPro Grip. And then the other group was saying, please use it in the next 10 weeks. So I was looking at if those muscles, if the muscle cross-sectional area was increasing through utilizing the device for 10 weeks, as well as their joint gapping with weight and without weight at 90 and 30 degrees of elbow flexion, just seeing how that elbow gap was changing. Like I said, the group that did use the FlexPro Grip, their elbow joint gapping changed significantly. Their change in gapping, so they're weighted to the unweighted condition, which is a good variable to look at because it shows how much the elbow gap is opening up under a load, which is precisely what a baseball player is doing when they are pitching. So looking at that and how much their elbow is opening up over a dynamic movement is super beneficial for us to know, as if it opens up less, then their forearm muscles are working to bear that load and their UCL is not getting nearly as exposed as it would without it. So yeah, really cool stuff.
And beyond that being really cool stuff, I think that was explained tremendously. I do think it's kind of funny the feedback that I got from the Zoom call or the whole webinar, where a lot of the people that I interact with are not biomedical engineers. They're not on the medical side. They're pitching coaches or they're facility coaches or they run teams, and they're saying that stuff seemed really cool and I understood a few of those words, but I know that it works. And now I just want to clip what you just said there and be like, all right, if you didn't understand that, I know you'll understand this. So I
Right.
would say great job with the summary. I don't think it could have been done more effectively because now all of us fourth grade level brain people fully understand what happened, what played out. I think now maybe discussing a little bit more of the subjects that you worked with or that you observed, I guess would probably be the better terminology. So you were forced to deal with the nature of a college baseball fall. You had
Yeah.
two collegiate teams. One collegiate team was the group that underwent FlexPro Grip training.
Yep.
Another collegiate team did not undergo FlexPro Grip training.
Correct.
And with that, like you did not have any say so in what those guys did beyond, hey guys, train on FlexPro. After
Yeah.
that, it was do your throwing program, do your weight training,
Listen to your
sleep,
coach.
eat, do whatever you normally do, correct?
Yep. And I mean, obviously with any scientific question you have, you can only control so much. And I wasn't going to put these guys in a bubble. And I know from the webinar, there was a lot of questions of like, did you control this? Did you know this? Did you know that? And you really can only control so much. And also it was a master's thesis. So I had 2 years, and if I was getting a PhD, it would have been more interesting to take more measurements and look at them more often, but I didn't have that kind of time or accessibility to them. They are highly controlled by, their schedules, and they have a class schedule as well, and fall ball. And so I was only able to look at them twice, like I said, before and after that 10 weeks. Working with them and scheduling ultrasound was kind of a beast, I'm not going to lie, because you had to talk to the coaches, but then the coaches had to talk to them, and then maybe they would miss their appointment because somebody slept too long. And I was like, I really need you to come, please. You'll know with science, the more the merrier with the participants, because that makes the statistics a lot more reliable. I had some people that may have not completed the correct training plan that they were supposed to, or some guys got injured on the control group. So injury is inevitable. Can't control for that, and that'll naturally occur. Or if someone simply didn't do the program like they were supposed to. So there were a lot of things I wasn't able to control, but essentially they were just told, please do your FlexPro Grip. I was always in the lab, in and out. I'd be in there doing my lab day-to-day things. I would ask them, like, are you guys doing it? Are you still making sure to do your FlexPro Grip? And they're, yes, we are. Or,
Yes, Jessica.
yeah, yeah. But I didn't have so much like control or just eyes on the control group. There wasn't a need for it, other than just like, don't do FlexPro Grip and just listen to your pitching coach.
One, I do think it's kind of funny that I know one athlete also had to be removed from the control group from the jump because
Yes.
he had been training on FlexPro Grip
Correct.
for a month or so by the time of the start of the study, and then trained throughout the entire fall.
Well,
So
he didn't tell me at the start. So I was like,
right.
okay, got it.
Yeah, good thing we were in consistent communication there, so I was able to pass that along to you. Otherwise,
Yes.
that might have muddied the waters just a little bit. Granted, it would have been 1 out of 18 as opposed to
Yeah.
a significant percentage, but still.
Multiple.
And then the other thing that I was going to hit on was actually one of the Q&A questions that was sent out during the webinar that I thought was a pretty good one, but I felt like surface level, it meant a lot. Then the more you break it down and the more you understand college athletics,
Mhm.
it might not mean as much. You played a bit of college lacrosse. You've obviously witnessed college athletics for a long time, especially at a high level. I remember one of the questions said, did the control group do similar forearm training, just not on the device during the dedicated 10 minutes 3 times a week that the training group performed on FlexPro? And I'm curious your reaction here. At first, I thought like, wow, this is a pretty insightful question. It would be interesting to see like what if they had that designated same exact training time. And then I
Yeah.
stepped away from it for a little bit and thought to myself, well, they're college athletes. and they're training and they're gripping and they're doing all these things anyways. And they're they're the control group, meaning they're doing what damn near every college baseball player in the
Right.
country is doing. That
Exactly.
was
And that's
that was
the
my
point
take.
of it was. The point of it was, let's see a collegiate, a high level, collegiate baseball team training how everyone else does. They go off and do what they normally would do. Same with my FlexPro Grip group. All that was added there was the FlexPro Grip. I didn't have any say or control over what the control or the FlexPro Grip group was doing besides the fact that they were using the device. Pretty much all we said is do what you normally do. And obviously every college level team is going to be strength training. They're going to be doing strength and conditioning of all different types of forms. And so they could have been doing some forearm training, but I guess the point of having them not use the device was to show how the FlexPro Grip can specifically target those muscles. Whereas if they were still doing that forearm strengthening in a different form, perhaps it doesn't necessarily target them. So I didn't have much control or say over anything. The point of it was that we send them off and we just say, don't use the FlexPro Grip. And then the FlexPro Grip group obviously used the device. And so they could have had some strength training involved. But again, so the device was it's supposed to specifically target those extrinsic muscles that surround the UCL and protect the UCL. And what the research did show is that by specifically targeting those muscles and strengthening those muscles through a designated hand gripping device that targets them, that we can help decrease that elbow gapping and further alleviate the stress that is being applied to the UCL during pitching.
I appreciate you adding some science-backed detail to my basic take, which was, no, this makes sense, the way that it was performed. But
Because
you obviously
obviously
did
they're
it
all
with,
going to be strength training. I mean, it's inevitable. I couldn't tell them, sorry, you can't lift weights. Sorry, you
right.
can't grip anything. It's everyone's going to be training, everyone's going to be lifting, and I can't say no to anything. I mean, they were just told, do what you do normally. And we're just going to measure some things.
So along this path, if you could effectively run back the study, and let's say you had a ton of manpower, like you just controlled a team of researchers under you and observers, what are other things that you would maybe want to control? How often do you think you would want to do ultrasounds if you could do them more often? And I know this is all hypothetical, so there's no right or wrong answer. Like, what would be your ideal number of participants on each side? What would be your ideal amount of capture windows, different things like that?
So again, because this was a master's thesis, I didn't necessarily have the manpower to really fine tune the study, but I did it to the best of my ability.
Right. You shouldered everything
Right.
basically with some
And
support from the team, but still.
definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. But so my study consisted of a mix of players that had already had a Tommy John surgery and players who did not have a Tommy John surgery already. I think it would be interesting to do this study again with players who have not had the surgery at all. So really just understanding how those muscles are working to protect the elbow. Not saying that a player with a Tommy John has a different experience to those who did not, but I think it's helpful to understand it in players who haven't had any manipulation to that medial elbow. And then also, I think the cohort sizes need to be much larger. I mean, again, I only really had 18 per cohort. I think 50 on both sides would be really, really nice to have a large sample size there, and it improves the statistics as well. But then if I could control things or just understand more what was going on, I would probably have both cohorts running the same strength and conditioning. So they would be on the same strength and conditioning. They would probably have the same pitching schedule, practice instruction, whatever that may be. They're obviously student athletes, so I can't really control their class schedule, but I don't know how much sleep would play into that. But I think having them do the same exact strength and conditioning and then pitching program would really mimic that. Also, maybe having the same amount of right-handed players and left-handed players. We had a little bit of a mix there, but it was pretty similar. And then the age. I think it would be interesting to look at maybe just freshmen coming in or just seniors, because my control group did have a lot more graduate and just like older players. So they were transfers, whereas my FlexPro group had a lot more incoming freshmen, which is totally fine. It's just that perhaps when they come in at that higher level collegiate level, they're really getting strong from that because they weren't training maybe at such a high rigor when they weren't in college. But I could totally be wrong. It would just be an interesting science question just to look at those differences and how age could affect that.
Part of the reason I even asked is I think it's really fun to think about what would be perfect and how close are we to that. Even the things you stated, you're not that far off. Like those are things you really can't control for. I feel like if you were even given a larger team to support you, the most you could do is extend the protocol by 2 weeks and add like three more ultrasound or like two ultrasounds in between.
I
But that
think
also,
sorry, go ahead.
no, that's on me. I spoke over you. Go ahead.
I was going to say measuring more frequently would be interesting just to understand how their muscles are developing and how their medial elbow gapping space is changing through that protocol, just for a more periodic understanding of
Yeah.
that.
Like
But
when is this occurring in the process?
exactly,
Is it early stage changes? Is it late stage changes? Or
right.
is it truly a quote unquote linear progression, or are we seeing the actual like hockey stick pickup over time?
Exactly. And the other tricky part with this, and especially just in baseball, is working around the staff. You don't have a whole lot of say as a researcher on what their pitching schedule is going to be or what their strength and conditioning schedule might look like. And so you kind of just have to go with what you're told and what the team is doing, because I'm not a pitching coach. I'm not a strength and conditioning coach. And that's not my specialty. So I'm not going to go tell them what to do and what their schedule is going to look like. So balancing that between the staff is also a factor that needs to be taken account for.
Let's go down that path for a minute. So, if you were in an academic position, or let's say you were given the reins, much like Dr. Nicholson has, and you're encouraging other students to take on these projects, what would be some of the recommendations that you would make to someone else taking on a research project, whether it's in the collegiate athletics setting that you did yours in, or maybe someone who's doing it at one of the massive baseball facilities. Basically, if you could offer some influence or guidance to someone else in your shoes, what would you recommend?
Definitely being open-minded. If you have a closed mind in this field, it's so difficult to navigate and move because things are constantly changing. Bumps in the road come up all the time. It's inevitable to hit a speed bump and for something to change or someone to miss their appointment that they were supposed to come in. You have to remove participants and nothing goes perfectly. So having an open mind and being willing to learn and adapt to those changes is huge. And then also, I would say just reading and learning from past literature of where people have had shortcomings or where they found success in their research specifically is super helpful in developing your protocols and your research and how it's all going to work together. I don't think if there's anything else though, but I think that's all.
I'll take that. But maybe a follow up on the open mind. Why I want to follow up specifically on that recommendation might just be showing I guess, my naive mind when it comes to hard data research. Of when I hear open mind at first, I think like, oh, yeah, I'm willing to hear these other perspectives or the ability to pivot, these kind of things. But you're trying to figure out hard data and present really solid evidence. So then how do you then balance, I guess, the human beings that you're working with as subjects and at that 18 to 22-year olds who basically have complete autonomy over their lives and do whatever they want and sleep till noon and play video games and all these different things. Granted, they do have to play baseball a few hours a day and go to class occasionally, but
Yes.
balancing that with the very specific mission that you are on. So where does the open mind fit in? Is it open mind with what is forced on you for your ability to adapt, or is it being able to change what you're trying to track down in research? I would just like if you could expand on that a little bit.
It definitely presents itself in a bunch of different forms, like you were saying, with the participants themselves, or perhaps the numbers you get. Statistics is a very convoluted subject in which maybe you have a certain data set and you're allowed to run certain tests because of normality and variance assumptions, all that, fancy statistical stuff. And you might be running a test and you realize my data isn't normal, meaning like a normality assumption, not the other way around. But you run a test and you're like, well, crap, like I can't run whatever test I planned on running because my data does not present a certain way. So sometimes you run into hiccups with how you want to perform analyses, or you run into hiccups with your participants themselves, or perhaps they didn't tell you something along the way and then at the end they tell you. So you kind of just have to be ready to take on different challenges that do come up within research. It's extremely inevitable wherever you may be in science. Nothing goes to plan, and that's okay because it's science and this is just life, right? Like shit happens. So having that open mind allows you to, I think, learn more too. I mean, I think I learned so much just going off the script of what I wanted it to specifically be like, but things change, like I said, and having that open mind really allows you to think more critically and analyze data differently, and just really look at the whole picture of the research and understanding how all of these factors work together and how important certain parts of the data collection really is.
When I hear that explanation, the word agility really comes to mind. I
Definitely.
Yeah, the ability to receive information, pivot accordingly, adjust, react, all the above.
Right.
That was just the word that was buzzing in my skull.
Right, because I mean, also you get missing data. Sometimes I was going through a picture and I was like, oh man, I didn't get the FDS on this guy, and there's ways to overcome that, but it obviously gets discussed in a research paper and
Mhm.
all that good stuff. But you learn a lot of ways to overcome the speed bumps that you encounter during research, and you have to be agile, like you said.
Now, maybe the next piece of this is not so much where does the data go from here, but where do you go from here with the data? I know you have some presentations later this summer. I believe that's correct. And you're not even quite at the official publication. I know you have your abstract. You're able to at least talk about what you're doing,
Yeah.
but what else do you have to go through in this process to actually get it on paper?
Yeah, well, obviously I submitted my thesis and graduated from grad school, all that good stuff. So it's on paper somewhere, but I'm presenting at ASB this summer. That happens alongside ABBS. So they're both in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and that's August 13th through 16th. I'll be there presenting at a podium about this study, but I also need to do a lot of fine tuning and working on just specifics for journals that may be willing to accept my paper as a publication. And so refining my work and my words as well, because papers really want that fine tuned narrative of what you found and what your results mean and what they show. And there's a natural occurrence of being wordy and really explaining a lot of different things, but they really just want the really sweet and short version of this is what happened and this is what I saw and this is what it means. And so I have to work on my writing of cutting it down and putting it into the form of what the journal might want.
How hard is that?
I would say it's pretty difficult because there's so much you want to say,
Yeah.
you get really excited about your research. At least I do. I think it's so cool. And I want to say everything, but it's difficult to cut it down because they only want very specific things. And that's completely fair. I mean, not everyone wants to read 50 pages worth of data. And so it's tricky to cut it down and make it so specific that you're saying everything and anything you want to say, but also saying it in the shortest way possible.
I would really struggle with that. From the conversations I've had with you, I fully grasp why that is difficult because you want to tell the story.
Exactly.
And the shorter it gets, especially since you lived it, it probably feels like details are getting plucked out. Of course, the actual hard literature, the data is still there, but we know from being around athletics, there's a story behind every single number. And I'm sure there's a little bit of you with the connection to the work you did where you feel like it's losing something, even
That's
if it is what the journal ultimately wants.
Yeah, and it's fun to explain like what those results mean. And so saying this is what I saw and this is what it means, but then taking that a step farther and saying this is also why this helps pitchers and what that can lead to. And so you have to really cut down the narrative, although I really want to talk about it, tell you why it's so great and wonderful, but you can't do that whole thing just because that's not what publishing is all about. It's really just that hard facts and what the repercussions of your study is.
This is a completely opinion-based question, so I don't want you to feel tied down to this one way or the other. Do you think as a whole, scientific research could, or the publication of scientific research could benefit from including more of those reactions or takeaways, or do you like it the way it is?
It conceivably could. I would say the way it is right now, it's really nice, like as a researcher, to just look at what has been done and knowing that this equals this or this causes just cut and dry facts. And there could be an alternative way for someone to understand the more in-depth research, but I guess that's where conversations like this come into play. When you're in the world of science, you do have a lot of connections to other people, and you're able to discuss with others how they did their research and what difficulties they may have run into or if they have any suggestions. But I think the way research is published now is very just helpful to another researcher just because we don't have time. Simply, there's not enough time in the day, and it's nice just to get those hard facts down. There's so many papers you read through. You read through hundreds and hundreds of papers, and there's just, again, there's not enough time in the day to hear not only about what they did and what they saw and what that means, but then everything else that there is with research.
We're going to take this path for a moment now. Since you said there isn't enough time in the day, it likely means there were some unimportant things that occurred during the study that maybe weren't included, or it was just kind of like side effect data in a sense for my non-research background. I feel like that's the best thing I could call it. Is there any just weird or strange takeaway or little happening or fun tidbit fact that you found during the study that just had nothing to do with your research that you haven't been able to let go of?
I mean, just the ultrasound images, that was rough. I mean, again, I'm not a certified ultrasonographer, but I can identify the medial epicondyle and Lyme tubercle. I can identify that. And looking at elbows of players who did have Tommy John surgery, that was a beast for sure. And I mean, sometimes there were certain participants who were a bit of an outlier, so there were removals of data there, but I wouldn't say there was anything too out of the ordinary other than my one control subject being a FlexPro user. That was a curveball there. But I would say overall, there were late nights coding and sifting through numbers and making sure I wasn't recording data in the wrong place and keeping it all organized. But there weren't any like horrendous hiccups or anything like that. Just some long nights of coding and data analysis. And
There was never a point where you thought, wow, I should become an ultrasound technologist.
no, no. And thankfully I had Dr. Pexa with me. He took all of those ultrasound images for me. I would not have been able to do that without him. So thank you to him for that. But yeah, looking through all those images, I never want to see one ever again.
And shout out me for again butchering another word. I somehow created the word technologist instead of technician. So yeah, I'm on an absolute roll today, as you can tell.
I didn't notice. So
Hey, this is part of the reason I do it. If I catch it, I
Mhm.
can't be made fun of for it, right? Or at least the window to make fun of me shrinks significantly. So with time winding down, because as you said, there's not enough time in the day for anybody that's in this field. We have a few things that we haven't really covered. We didn't talk at all about what you did with Kinetrax, and we haven't talked at all about what you're going to be doing in the future with New Balance. I guess the quick Kinetrax question would be, when in the progression of you as a student did you take on the role with Kinetrax? Was that in between Virginia Tech, Wake Forest? Was it during? Where did that all fit in?
I started my position at Kinetrax. It was August of 2024. So it was between my first and second year of grad school. And I took on some, well, not some, night shifts. And so doing the 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. beast of a shift. But baseball's always happening, right? So
Always.
if it's at 9 p.m. on the West Coast, it's 11 p.m. on the East Coast. And so you're waiting for those games to come in. And so you're working on your thesis all day long and coding, or you're in the lab and collecting data. And then you go home at night and you're working from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. And then you wake up the next day and do it all again. And it was a good experience. And it was a good way to get myself really deeper into that baseball community. Because like I said, I didn't really have any baseball knowledge prior to, but we also used the system within the lab. So it was also helpful to us to have a deeper understanding of the system and the data we had running. But overall, it was just a good experience to have alongside my data analysis process through my research, but then also having that separate experience through Kinetrax.
Probably a good enough run through of Kinetrax unless there's something that you feel like you want to add. But I'm super interested in what you're going to be doing with New Balance, unless it's top secret and you're not allowed to share with any of us.
No, it's a really cool position. I mean, I kept telling people, I'm like, oh, I'm not expecting my dream job out of college. Like, it's okay. I don't have to. And this is kind of like exactly what I want to be doing. I'm over the moon about it. It's so again, the position I'm going to be an intern, so it's a 1 year internship at New Balance as a sports research engineer, and I'm going to be working in their sports research lab. And essentially, what they're doing there is engineering and researching all of their different shoes that they're producing, whether it's running shoes, basketball shoes, baseball cleats, track shoes, all of those different sports and realms of shoes that they produce. And so do mechanical testing, but then also biomechanical testing. So understanding how the human is moving with the shoe, but also engineering the shoe specifically for longevity and then also human improvement. It's a double-ended sword of that human aspect, but also how the product moves with the human.
Well, if you can be the one that debuts the wide toe box, barefoot-esque baseball cleat, I think you will be the most famous woman on the planet in the baseball sphere.
That would be something, wouldn't it?
I would love it. I've got a few pairs of wide toe box barefoot shoes. No free ads, so I'm going to avoid saying brands. But I've got a few pairs sitting to my left, and if I had cleats on those, I would be one ecstatic individual.
All right. Well, I'll keep that in the back of my head as a little note to self.
Yeah, so if you ever get hit with the, hey, does anyone have ideas of what we could look at? Feel free to take that as your own.
Will do.
Yes. Is there any specific project that you can think of? So I gave you what I would love to see, but even going into the work that you're going to be doing with New Balance, is there a specific project that you would love to work on or that you could envision potentially being a part of?
The projects are endless. So there's so many different routes to go. And coming out of baseball, I mean, I already have a really strong background in that now. And so understanding like foot plant mechanics and how a shoe could potentially impact that would be really interesting to me. But something I'm really interested in is like the shoe latching mechanisms and where shoes are tied and how it supports the foot when someone is moving. And I love that realm of research and how a foot can be supported through a movement. There's so many different ways, like soccer cleat, the lacing kind of goes up the side, or sometimes there's Velcro or laces just up the middle, or shoes will have the knob system on it. So there's a bunch of different ways a shoe can be designed to support someone in their everyday movements, but I find that super fascinating, and I think it would be a really interesting research question. But like I was saying, specifically for baseball, I mean, a lot of my research discussed how important the kinetic chain is and how the transfer of energy up the body in the whole pitching movement is so critical to not only how fast someone is throwing, but how much force gets placed to their medial elbow. And so potentially how a shoe is designed or supports one in that pitching movement could impact their pitching mechanics, but also the forces experienced in their medial elbow.
Well, I love where your head's at because you're going to go into a shoe and performance apparel company and potentially still be impacting athlete health, which is incredible.
Yes, it's very, very exciting. I love this realm. I love injury prevention, rehabilitation, and again, that's why I took on this project. I find it so important, but also interesting, and I'd love everyone to stay healthy, of course, but injury is inevitable, and we have to find out how we can help those who become injured.
Well, we're gonna hit you with one last fun question
Okay.
before we let you go for the day. Given where you're from in Michigan, given your time at Wake Forest, and now being up in Boston, you have plenty of tremendous sandwich shop options. You had Michigan, you had Zingerman's, you had Maize and Blue Deli.
Yeah.
Those are incredible spots. Wake Forest, you had Dioli's at your beck and call. You're in Boston, which is the home of dang near every corner market you could ever dream of, with the best food on the planet, or some of the best food on the planet. I'm still partial to New Orleans, but I think we have a lot of Northeasterners excited about their delis up there. What is your ideal lunch?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Hey, we got to keep people guessing on here. The ideal lunch.
Ideal lunch. Oh boy. Honestly, I have to go back to Michigan because my favorite thing is I'm from the Rochester area there. There's a place called Rochester Brunch House, and they have a phenomenal Rochester cherry chicken salad. It is so good. And so Michigan is like known for their cherries and stuff. So
Yeah.
the cherries are so good, but it has chicken on it and the most amazing raspberry vinaigrette, and it has some blue cheese on it, and there's like walnuts in it. It's so good. And then it comes with pita, and they have the best coffee there, hands down. I mean, it's amazing breakfast, but that salad is so top tier. I absolutely love it so much, and I miss it. I try to make it myself, but it's never the same. So, but cherries
Well,
from Michigan, those are the best.
I apologize for making you homesick at the end of this episode, then. But yeah, isn't it funny how the hardest question you get all day is the one that you should be able to think of in an instant? Just like,
I
what do I actually like to eat?
Zingerman's is really fire though. I mean, their sandwiches are no joke there. And if anyone's ever in Ann Arbor, go to Zingerman's. Their sandwiches are insane. And they're so well known for a reason.
Yeah, I think Zingerman's might be one of Daryl's favorite spots on earth. He
It's
definitely
amazing.
gets it every time he's up there.
So good.
But Jess, thanks a ton for the time today. It was fun hanging out with you once again. I know you're going to be super busy, and unfortunately, we're not going to be able to talk about the study, I think, quite as much now that it is more or less complete. But it's been great getting to know you over this past calendar year, and we know you're going to do great things taking on this new role at New Balance.
Thank you so much. And it's been such a pleasure working with you all. And this research has been really life-changing, I guess. And I'm so glad I can help you all, but also lots of players within baseball and other sports improve their forearm health.
Your name's going to be in the history of baseball one day, I like to think.
That'd be cool.
It would be super cool. Whether it's for forearm health or designing the cleats that are going to make baseball players really happy. But
Right.
take it either way. Regardless, this was an awesome conversation. Thanks for hanging out with us today. And everyone, thanks for laying back with us.